with reduced risk. And for this, I would like to invite on stage Mr. Praveen, who is the Procurement Head Raw Materials and Milks India at Nestle. Giving a brief introduction, Mr. Praveen carries over 22 plus years of experience in the industry and is passionate, result-driven and people-centric leader, adept in managing supply chain, sourcing, operation for food and beverages across South Asia region. With this, please welcome him with a huge round of applause.
Good. I'll try and keep it very brief and maybe try and make more time for questions. I'm coming with a little bit of a presentation background from an FMCG company, so pardon me if I'm not able to address a lot of non-FMCG based risk stuff here, but I'm sure during the program it would have been adequately addressed to the other sectors too, right? So, just trying to give you a perspective, risk for us is coming from a fundamental element around growth. And growth for us is to be driven, which is in line with what the consumer wants, right? And for us, the whole element around risk starts from an end-to-end supply chain view and not just a limited element of procurement view around it, right? So fundamentally for us, risk is not just a project, right? It's across the value chain, and when I talk value chain, it's right from the farm down end to that retailer who's selling the product and where the consumer is trying to pick up the product, or even let's say when the mother is trying to pick up that product from let's say a big bazaar store, and the moment of truth for us is there. So for us, it's an end-to-end risk is what we need to look at. And that's how we see risk at Nestle, right? Now, in order to do that, it actually starts creating behaviors which are beyond the element of just saying that we'll do the classic procurement stuff of, single source reduction and stuff like, can I do an alternative supplier or can I do some recipes here and there? So when we look at risk, it's more proactive stuff. And that comes only with this concept of end-to-end value chain and value chains for each business. So let's say a chocolates business will have a different value chain and hence will have a different risk mapping across vis-a-vis let's say a dairy or a nutrition value chain, vis-a-vis a coffee or a chilled dairy value chain where let's say the shelf life of a product itself is 15 days, right? So the entire risk matrix changes dimensions once you start looking at businesses. And seeing that if I were the CEO or if it were my business, how would I see risk in my business to be addressed, right? And that's the perspective with which we look at risk. Now, I've just tried to put some framework around how we look at risk, but just don't get into the details of this. Fundamentally, what we're trying to do here is that we need to just do this in terms of anticipation. We find out what kind of risks are there across the value chain, right? And we just implement and review them. As simple as that. It's not complex, it's not rocket science, but it requires basically different cross-functional teams to come together and collaborate on this framework, right? Now, how do you do it? You do it predominantly through these reviews, right? Which is right down there. So you review, let's say you're ensuring full supply strategy, which is like 36 months, broken down to 18 months, broken down to 4 months, a month and a week and a day, right? And you review them at different frequencies across the different value chains, right? So most of these strategic reviews happen at quarterly level, but you have the other ones happening at monthly, bi-monthly and weekly levels too, right? We do have something like cross-functional operational reviews, which we drive across the businesses. For each business, we do drive different reviews at different frequencies, where most of these risks, right, whether they are external, internal, related to supplier reliability, or let's say even classic sourcing risks, right, or even planning risks, are actually quantified, tabulated, and decisions need to be driven. Now, when I say that, what I mean to say is that the linkage of all of this makes sense when you link it up to sales. Okay? So unless you and I are able to tell the business that in their language that this amount of organic growth is going to be impacted or this amount of profitability is at risk, I don't think that any of this quantification or let's say digitization or any of these tools will make sense. So for us, it might look very or appear very classic or vanilla, but what I'm trying to come at is from a risk perspective, unless we link it to top lines, bottom lines, or the lines on the P&L that are getting impacted, we won't get the decisions that we want to have, and we won't get the speed and the agility that we want to drive those projects or those closures that will de-risk the supply chain. I'll give you an example. In COVID times, people were talking about, somebody was talking about in a slide here that there was profitability loss of 6% to 20% range and stuff like that. We had no disruptions. And how we did it is fundamentally, we said, I have, let's say, 500 SKUs. I cannot manufacture 500 SKUs, right? My suppliers cannot manufacture those many direct and materials and packaging materials and services to happen to feed 500 SKUs. So we just need to prioritize. The way to prioritize is a very simple example of ABC. And ABC for us is very simple: organic growth, profitability, period. There is no other matrix. And that's pure business thinking. So let's make the A class. If we get time, we make B. If we get time, we make C. And we just prioritize each business's value chain according to it. Of course, there is freshness, there are other elements to it, there is inventory which you need to prioritize and so on and so forth. But if you put that framework into mind, the upstream framework for supply chain became very easy to do. So I just have to feed these SKUs which are going to drive those sales and that profitability. If that's my end goal, I can optimize my entire tier 1, tier 2 to just cater and focus to that. And to do that, we can actually dissect a lot of suppliers which can say based on reliability, service, quality, commercials, you can actually drive value chain. So a lot of risk for us is very simply driven through business focus. And another example was, we've seen recent disruptions around these China and Ukraine, and we keep on hearing this coming back and again in regulatory frameworks. Again, fundamentally, what are we trying to say? We're trying to say, I need to drive growth in an economy which is growing, and I need to be profitable about it. Right? Which means I need to do business here. So all of my supply chains that are import dependent need to be make in India. Now if that piece is very clear with business that I need to have a make in India strategy, rest everything is possible. So once you convince business to say, look guys, if there's no point showing risk, but what are we going to do about it? The risk is regulatory, the risk is supply chain disruptions, the risk is imports, the risk is long lead times on sailings, the risk is, let's say, one origin not working and we shifting origins. Let's very simply say, let's do it here. If we've got to do it here, there's a lot of work that procurement has to do. Right? So if you've got to meet, let's say, global specifications, you've got to develop suppliers, you've got to upscale suppliers, you've got to do the suppliers end, right? You've got to do technology transfers. But if that is what is needed to make the business run and de-risk that supply chain, then that's the priority. As simple as that. Otherwise, we'll have popcorn floating, left, right, and center all the time. So for us, very simple things in my view have worked. And continue to work amidst all these disruptions that we see. Because fundamentally when we get into a room with some business thinking, I think it cuts out all the element around, functional issues between, let's say, what a technical is having a priority or what a procurement has as a priority. or let's say what quality has got their own priorities. Because at the end of it, if it's impacting sales and it's impacting profitability, the solution has to be very business oriented. It cannot be left or right for us, right? So I think those simple principles is what I've tried to capture here in terms of a framework. And I just hope I've not left you with this concept of risk. So please tailor your risk to what I'm trying to drive here as a thought. And this is actually on a very lighter note. That's all that I have, but I'm open to questions on if you have any, happy to share.
I think it was a very good presentation, short and sweet. So what is your typical average lead time to qualify a supplier and onboard them into your system?
It's like getting into IIT. The lead time is long. See, I'll tell you why. Nestle as a company we've got this whole element around, what if the mother takes a product for her baby who's like an infant, right? And you get something wrong with that product, right? Let's say you get a foreign body, you get a hair, you get, let's say, something which is out of norm. As a mother, would you want to consume that product again for your baby? The answer is no, right? So for us, the whole dimension of, element of a business partner supplying that to us starts with that moment of truth. And that is what I need to achieve. So if that is what I need to achieve, then for us, certain things are just non-negotiable, which is like compliance, which is quality, right? Which is ethics, right? And now you add the new animal of sustainability to it. So if you add these four things, it's not very easy for a business partner to come and say that I will be able to consistently drive these metrics to satisfy that mother. It's a very challenging task in my view. Reason also being that the regulatory requirements in our country might be here, and for us, the Swiss standard is here. And for us, it's the max of the two. So whichever is higher is what we will follow, irrespective of the law of the land. So if the benchmarks are here, the whole value chain is not a very, let's say, a very large and very easy space for anybody to enter in, right? Because it requires a lot of hand-holding, a lot of knowledge sharing. I would say, on an average, if I were to start and pick a supplier, it could be anywhere between 6 months to a year. For certain requirements which are high hygiene, it could be as long as 2.5 years before that person, he or she, actually starts doing commercial contracts with us. So for us, the stuff around supplier selection is highly, I wouldn't say, see, strategic is a word everybody uses. But how we see it is, it's an entrepreneur who's going to come in, invest time, money, capital, people, resources, right? It shouldn't go wrong for him, because if it went wrong for him, it's going to be a big problem for me. So we have to be very clear on this element of that it's going to be a really long-term win-win for him and us. And in that space, that assessment is right. So it's not, I don't think it's just about supplier onboarding for us. It's also seeing that like first milestone of 5 years and then maybe 10 years, how do we see that, that investment of the relationship moving, right? And that's, I think, that's how we look at it, because we're always, trying to find this answer to the question that how do we satisfy the mother?
And does your sales or your stakeholders complain about this long gap of onboarding or bringing the supplier active into the system. I'll tell you why, because we are in health tech company, and we take 6 to 12 months, like you mentioned. Similar compliance issues, regulations, contracts, very complex. We take 6 to 12 months, and there's a lot of cribbing that happens. It's too long. Procurement takes time. It's not procurement, but then there's so many other functions which get involved. That's why I just wanted to check, is it the same behavior or attitude across industries?
I don't know about across industries, but I can tell you about the organization that I am with. It's very pick and choosy. It can't just be any business partner. There has to be a thought through in terms of what the strategy is, where are we going to position him or her, and what's the view of that business partner for us, more importantly, than us positioning them, because that is key. So somebody talked about supplier segmentation and relationships. It's not, for us, it's not about how I want the relationship to be. For me, it's about how that person's relationship is going to be with Nestle, and how do they see it? Is it transactional? Is it just commercial? Is it just taking a contract and earning money elsewhere? Or is it actually truly creating value, and are they serious in actually getting the technologies up, their people skill sets up, and actually doing a good job for that mother whom they are making the product at the end? Because I'll give you another example. We are in this still dairy business, and we had this issue of dahi having a small hair that came out, and we got the product back because we are pretty clear. Now the upstream space, it comes from somewhere, So one way is that you look at the contract and you say you'll put a penalty and you'll do this and you'll do that and all of it, and you'll blacklist the supplier and do all of it. We did nothing. So we just got 2 or 3 people, including procurement, myself, and we just went to the business partners area and we said we want to have lunch, which is fine. And we organized dahi to be served to the entire workforce. Okay, there are ladies who are doing manual work, there's some automation, this, that. We all had dahi. And we actually planted hair in a couple of dahi cups. Surprisingly, the same attitude happened. Dahi was not eaten. So for us, the whole element of saying, managing issues, risk, compliance, actually was solved in half an hour. So you can get the people to understand that this is your contribution and that's what's happening. Behaviors changed overnight. So for us, that is where it takes time to get that right with that, to that level, So we will even get into, let's say, tier 2, and we will suggest that, let's work with your tier 2 to see that you don't have challenges on your upstream compliance, quality, and so on and so forth. Things like, I'll tell you why it also takes time. Things like SEDEX, everybody does SEDEX SGS compliances these days, right? Fire hydrant systems are not present in some business partners areas. It's a big risk according to us. They're not ready to invest. There's an issue. We figured out a commercial model around it and said, let's go ahead. They did it with reluctance. Surprisingly, there was a fire in the next door factory. They didn't have a fire hydrant. The fire hydrant that was installed, courtesy our push and all of it, was used to save lives there. Promoter mindsets changed instantly, and we saw a lot of that ripple effect come through, and you could drive those elements of behaviors. That's where it takes time. So for us, certain things are just now and have been non-negotiable in terms of these elements. So hence, supplier onboarding for us is, I wouldn't say a challenge, it's a different ballgame.
Praveen, very interesting topic and thanks for insights. Since it's a procurement thing, I want to know for your organization, what are the competitive synergies that you see, like synergies between the competitor? Do you have such initiatives taken in order to reduce the risk in the overall supply chain?
So competitive synergies to reduce risk in overall supply chain, we are constantly doing competitive benchmarking, right? Of supply chains. So we don't, if you want to ask me on procurement space, of course it will happen in the procurement space also. So strategies on procurement will be more or less similar. But what happens is, when you actually benchmark, let's say, a Nestle vis-a-vis Asian Paints, vis-a-vis an ITC, vis-a-vis them, I'll tell you, it comes from what consumer you're serving. I'll come back to the fundamental element. Everybody will not see the mother the way we want to see it. And hence those benchmarks in a way look to us that we've got a lot of catch up to do, right? But then there are certain things that we want to do them right, rather than not doing them this way. So for us, comparative benchmarking is more of inspiration. That can we do it faster? Can we do it still the right way and yet the compliant way and yet meet those benchmarks? So we use it more like playing with Federer than actually getting intimidated by it. But yes, short answer, we do it and we do it across the value chain.
Yeah, hi Praveen. Yeah.
In interest of time, sir,
One question. Okay. No, so you very nicely mentioned, the kind of, DNA that the company has. A lot of my friends, colleagues are working with Nestle. While being in procurement, do you ever face this challenge or trade-off? Trade-off will be, of course, clear between quality and cost, but do you have internal targets to get it also at the best value, the quality at the best value? And how do you meet that? Yeah.
For us, quality is non-negotiable. There's no questions. So if that's non-negotiable, we still have to create value. So value will come, in my view, again through upgrading technology at business partners' ends, for driving these behaviors, for driving, sharing these practices that we live by day in, day out. Example, testing methods, So you have labs in the country who test a particular thing. We test it in a different way. We test it in Singapore and Germany to the best of the world labs with LIs as at PPB levels. Can we get that technology here? And can we share it with them? Can we train their quality people to do it? So I think those are the ways that we address it and thereby create value. You can reduce rejections, you can reduce inventories, there's a whole lot of value that comes by doing this. So yet being compliant on saying that quality is non-negotiable. Because again, I'll come back to, you can't have that hair in that cup, right? It's going to lead to a recall and the cost on brand value is too much to pay vis-a-vis this trade-off. So this trade-off is not what we look at, in my view.